Putin's dictatorship is approaching its 26th year. He has ruled Russia longer than all his predecessors, longer than Brezhnev, longer than Gorbachev and Yeltsin combined.
If we impose firm order with a strong hand, all of us will live better, more comfortably, more safely. But that comfort will not last. The strong hand will very quickly begin to squeeze us, and we will feel it immediately, in our own lives and in the lives of our families.
Putin has been squeezing Russia for over a quarter of a century, and many Russians seem to accept it. For decades, they've been told democracy in Russia is impossible.
There can be no democracy in this country. That is the main and fundamental truth we must remember. No one should ever forget it.
For more than 25 years, Putin has sat on the throne in the Kremlin. From there, every major decision flows downward. In today's Russia, there is no legislative branch, no executive branch, no independent judiciary. There are only the Kremlin's laws. How are they made? How do they work? Who truly decides the fate of ordinary Russians? Which clans are carving up the country, profiting from its people and its resources? My name is Yuri Kolinich. Let's break it all down in the project By the Kremlin's Law. Vladimir Putin has ruled Russia for so long that it feels as though he has always been there. Russians born after he came to power now have children of their own. Under Russia's constitution, Vladimir Vladimirovich could remain in power until 2036, if everything goes according to his plan. And already today, much of the population can barely remember a time when Putin was anything other than the so-called president. Today, we will look at how the Kremlin's autocrat began his rise. How did he construct his system of power? Who helped transform the fragile democratic shoots of the 1990s into a full-fledged dictatorship? According to my guest, political strategist Abbas Galyamov, Putin's main bet has always been on administrative control.
Many people see Putin as a great politician. After all, he has been in power for 25 years. Which in itself is often taken as evidence of political stature. But that is a misconception. He's a highly effective administrator. He has mastered the art of substituting politics with administrative leverage. Yet, strictly speaking, from a political standpoint, he has never genuinely demonstrated himself in a truly political sense. He served Sobchak, then he served Yeltsin, then Yumashev, first Chubais, then Yumashev, then Borodin. There was a whole chain of officials who appointed and promoted him because he was a loyal and capable subordinate. And in the end, precisely because he served well, he was made president during the crisis that engulfed Yeltsin's government in the late 1990s. At that moment, Putin seemed like the safest option.
But administrative leverage alone does not explain everything. To understand how Putin's dictatorship took shape, we need to go back further, to the early 1990s. Here is how Russian opposition politician Ilya Ponomarev describes that period.
I would start in 1991, when Yegor Gaidar granted him a license that allowed him to bypass the law and bring contraband into St. Petersburg. That's where Vladimir Putin's business empire began. And that's also when the Ozero cooperative started to take shape.
The now infamous Ozero cooperative was established in November 1996. Putin and 7 of his friends decided to build neighboring dachas on the shore of Lake Komsomolskoye, outside St. Petersburg. It was a club based on proximity and loyalty, not on professional merit. The rules were simple: stay silent, ask no questions, and share in the profits drawn from state budgets, state corporations, and any resources accessible to members of what was, in effect, a criminal network. Putin and his inner circle staged what could be called a cooperative performance for the Russian public, a performance paid for out of the pockets of ordinary citizens. Putin's Ozero friends helped him pull off his first 2 major schemes: a program known as Raw Materials in Exchange for Food, and the takeover of Bank Rossiya, which had previously belonged to the Communist Party. These deals gave Putin and his associates both their first large sums of money and a place to store it. 5 of the 7 friends with whom Putin founded the Ozero cooperative were representatives of the so-called FTI group, former employees of a physics and technology institute who tried to engage in business under his patronage. The other 2 were Vladimir Smirnov and Nikolai Shamalov. Smirnov's business was linked at the time to the Tambov organized crime group. Shamalov managed kickbacks for Putin connected to medical equipment supplies for St. Petersburg.
They were all offered a deal. The message was simple: stay out of politics. In fact, more than that. When the state calls, when the country demands it, you salute and contribute whatever resources are required for the tasks assigned to you. In return, you won't just be left alone to grow your businesses. The state will actively protect your interests. It will shield you. Those who understood the rules have done very well, and they are still doing well. Even under sanctions, they continue to back Putin, because for them, Putin is not just a political leader. He is their guarantee, their protection, the foundation that secures their prosperity and safeguards the assets they accumulated while he remains in power.
Meanwhile, his inner circle, the Patrushev, Fradkov, Gref, and Surkov families, among others, has built deliberate family power hierarchies. Can we say that Putin brought all these people into his orbit back in the 1990s? Who stood at the origins of the Ozero cooperative? And which of those ties remain intact today?
The foundation, of course, is the St. Petersburg group. That has never changed. And within that Petersburg circle, there are 2 main sources. One consists of his former KGB colleagues, people he crossed paths with during his service. The other is made up of business associates, those he dealt with while working at the mayor's office. Broadly speaking, figures like Kovalchuk, Forsenko, Shamalov, and even Prigozhin belong to that second category. These are people who entered Putin's life in the 1990s through business connections. Then there are individuals such as Chemezov, Patrushev, and at the time Cherkesov, representatives of the security services. They come from the intelligence and law enforcement establishment. After moving to Moscow, however, Putin significantly broadened his circle, building a new layer of connections rooted in the capital. Roman Abramovich, for example, became close to him during that period and emerged as one of the influential figures of the Moscow stage. Later came people he considers dependable and with whom he works closely: Kirienko, Shoigu, now Mishustin, and others. Belousov as well. These are not part of the original St. Petersburg core. They do not belong to the old Petersburg network that formed around him in the 1990s.
When Putin came to power in 2000, he immediately set about bringing the entire country under control. His first step was to remove the political inheritance he received from Yeltsin. Independent-minded politicians, dissenters, business leaders, political parties, all were pushed aside. In place of political diversity came United Russia. Ironically conceived by Yeltsin-era figures such as Boris Berezovsky, Valentin Yumashev, and Roman Abramovich, the party was handed over to Boris Gryzlov. How did Gryzlov rise so quickly? He went to school with Putin's longtime ally, Nikolai Patrushev. Gryzlov became Speaker of the State Duma, consolidating Putin's grip over parliament, while maintaining close ties with the security services. Patrushev, a longtime associate, oversaw the FSB. Through these personal alliances, Putin secured the loyalty of the Siloviki and gradually brought them deeper into politics. Those who resisted were removed. Those who accepted the so-called barbecue agreement, Putin's ultimatum to big business, were left alone. Stay out of politics, and you may survive. Criticize, mock, or challenge the system, and there is no place for you in Putin's Russia.
He seized NTV from Gusinsky. He took Channel 1 from Berezovsky. From that point on, elections increasingly shifted under the control of administrative leverage. With each news cycle, the political substance was stripped away. Competition weakened. Debate disappeared. What remained was pure administrative machinery. Pressure, access, control. Putin has never taken part in a truly competitive campaign. He has never stood in open debate with an opponent. Everything we have seen from him in the public arena has been carefully staged and tightly controlled. Not a dialogue, always a monologue.
Seizing businesses and branding it as a fight against the oligarchs became one of Putin's favorite tactics, and much of the Russian public bought into it. Few were willing to object, because the handouts from the Kremlin were enough to keep people satisfied.
Let me remind you that in the 2000s, global oil prices surged dramatically. At certain points, they rose more than tenfold compared to 1998 and 1999, the end of the 90s. In some cases, the increase was even greater than that. As a result, the country was flooded with money. The state could afford to gradually feed the population, to raise living standards, to offer visible improvements. People liked it, and they were willing to overlook the dismantling of democracy. Freedom was traded for material comfort. Today, the outcome is clear. Every institution in the country is subordinated to Putin. Most of them function largely as facades. Parliament is not a parliament. The media is not truly media. Law enforcement does not operate as law enforcement. Federalism is not federalism. Elections are not elections. Parties are not parties. The labels remain on the surface. Party, federal system, judiciary, but in reality their primary purpose is to serve the political interests of Putin and his inner circle.
One of the central pillars of Putin's Russia is supposedly family values. At least, that is what the Kremlin dictator invokes with striking regularity in almost every public speech. Putin speaks of family, responsibility, care, reverence for marriage as a union between a man and a woman, and the upbringing of children. Yet, his own example offers Russians little to follow. I encourage our viewers on YouTube to actively comment on this episode. In particular, tell us what you think about Putin's family. We are waiting for your thoughts below. When we speak about Putin's so-called family, who are we actually talking about? Is it a matter of blood relatives, or is the concept broader?
I would not exaggerate the importance of family in Putin's case. Despite all the rhetoric about traditional values and moral foundations, he is not a family-oriented person. On the one hand, he is constructing a system of succession, effectively reviving something close to aristocracy, or rather, a form of neo-feudalism in Russia. But such systems traditionally rely on inheritance through the male line, and Putin, as we know, has daughters. So when it comes to himself, he is not building a dynasty in the classic sense. What he has instead is the Ozero cooperative, a circle of loyalists, a clan, but not a family-based one. It resembles a large mafia network, rather than a hereditary household. Of course, there are close relatives, first and foremost his daughters, and the circle around them is expanding. Names like Belousov, Kirill Dmitriev, Anna Tsivilyova and her husband, even a distant cousin carrying the surname Putin, appear in this orbit. But their prosperity is less about formal succession and more about proximity. People around them seek favor with the supreme leader by granting advantages and preferential treatment to his relatives. In doing so, they hope to secure benefits for themselves.
The entire Kremlin elite, from top to bottom, is structured personally by Putin. Each clan has its own rules and its own internal competition. In the security bloc, he deliberately fuels rivalry and regularly reshuffles positions, so that every personnel and strategic decision ultimately rests in his hands. In the economic sphere, he is more selective. Loyalty matters, but so does competence. He needs professionals who can at least soften the consequences of the Kremlin's policy failures.
This is a nomenclatura-style approach inherited from the Soviet era. There's a closed circle of untouchables, and their specific title or function at any given moment is secondary. Today, someone may oversee agriculture, tomorrow a steel mill. The position is interchangeable. What matters is belonging to the circle. In this system, the person defines the post, not the other way around. Of course, there are historically formed fiefdoms, areas of long-standing influence, but even their loyalty outweighs specialization. Nikolai Patrushev, for example, is hardly capable of anything beyond repetitive security rhetoric. Even Sergei Narishkin struggles to compete in the scale of conspiracy theories and grand narratives about global plots. They have not yet blamed Martians, but they have already embraced every imaginable Masonic conspiracy. At the same time, Patrushev Jr., who worked in agriculture on the financial side, was entrusted with profile responsibilities when needed. The distinction between father and son is less important than their place within the hierarchy. Roles shift. Functional responsibilities can change, even for the same individual over the course of a career. Take Belousov as an example. He is considered close to Putin and is fundamentally an economist by training. Yet, he was appointed Minister of Defense because Putin decided that what the Defense Ministry required at that moment was a competent economist. That represents a dramatic shift in role. But in this system, such shifts are driven by perceived expediency. These are not hereditary fiefdoms. On the contrary, I believe this is a deliberate method of governance. A conscious mechanism Putin uses to maintain flexibility, loyalty, and ultimate control.
For years, Russia's entire power structure has been subordinated to one man. And yet, no one around him can deliver bad news. In the Kremlin, the priority is to please the Tsar, meaning Putin. He must always hear that everything is under control. According to Abbas Galiamov, proximity to Putin depends on flattery.
He communicates exclusively with people who tell him what he wants to hear. As a result, he becomes more deeply entrenched in his own beliefs. No matter what happens, no matter how many failures his course produces in reality, he does not question his assumptions. He remains convinced that everything he conceived was brilliant, and that only incompetent subordinates are preventing his grand ideas from being fully realized. Of course, on every issue, he has officials he consults, members of the government he turns to. But he treats them more as technical experts than as independent actors. None of them can afford to openly disagree with him. Everything must be presented in a way that leaves him feeling comfortable and affirmed. Under no circumstances can it sound like, "Boss, things are bad because your original idea was flawed." Instead, the message has to be framed carefully. Yes, there are difficulties, but the strategy itself was visionary. We just need minor adjustments. The plan was genius. You are wise and powerful. This has been the format of their interaction for years. And while the praise continues, the situation steadily deteriorates. Just look at what is happening to the economy.
Russia's economy is teetering on the edge of collapse, driven there by Putin's imperial obsession, the full-scale war against Ukraine, and the silence of a majority whose defining trait has become endurance. Russians have long been stripped of the right to choose, to speak freely, and to know the truth, yet they remain silent. Does that mean that, under any scenario, the role of the street, of society, of citizens, is minimal?
It is minimal right now. But history is fluid. Tomorrow it could become decisive. In a struggle between competing factions, the ability to appeal to the street, to negotiate with protest leaders, can become a powerful bargaining chip in the hands of one of those factions. The more moderate players may well rush to opposition leaders and try to coordinate against a more radical, hardline figure, a kind of new barrier. They might say, let's agree on terms to stop those who are grabbing for power. At that moment, the street could play a crucial role, not as an independent force, but as an instrument aligned with one faction of the elite. It would be an alliance between public pressure and part of the ruling class.
So, is Putin's pocket power structure a solid monolith? What or who could crack it? Just how unbreakable is this dictatorship?
This is a bankrupt political regime. It survives on force alone. The problem is that those who hold the weapons have accumulated enormous power. And now, in many ways, Putin has become dependent on them. Individually, he could still crush any single Silovik if he chose to. But as a collective force, as a corporate security elite, they are no longer something he can simply ignore or override. He would not dare to move openly against their will. Much of his decision-making is shaped by that reality. He is constrained by the very security apparatus that once served purely as his instrument. At the beginning, he was its unquestioned master. The security structures were useful, but they were secondary. He did not rule because of them. Now he rules only through them. And they understand that the throne stands on their shoulders.
Once again, I want to turn to our viewers. In your opinion, how might Putin's regime end? Share your thoughts in the comments below this episode. If we imagine the collapse of this Putin system, can it fall only when its own elites begin devouring each other?
Putin himself will destroy it. He has dismantled every institution within the system. Without him, it cannot survive in its current form. It will mutate into something else. It could become worse. It could become better. It will likely remain imperial and harsh, but it will not be the same structure.
On March 26, 2000, Putin was elected president for the first time. After that, genuine elections in Russia effectively ceased to exist. He was a product of the Yeltsin family and of the security services that shaped modern Russia. He did not simply bend the constitution, he rewrote it repeatedly, tailoring the country's fundamental law to fit his personal power. For more than a quarter of a century, Russia has lived not by its constitution, but by the laws of the Kremlin. These rules have nothing to do with the rule of law or with statehood in any meaningful sense. And sooner or later, they will inevitably destroy the country. The process has long been underway. The countdown is approaching its end. My name is Yuri Kulinich. You've been watching By the Kremlin's Law.